It's football and other F words. Man, I'm just exhausted, guys, because, I've just been thinking about Breeland Speaks and how much he could bring to this Tennessee Titans pass rush, just like everybody else has been.
Oh, God.
Because everybody, I tell you, I don't know if all fan bases do this, but there is no fan base in the NFL that loves to jump on the bandwagon so quick of a player who has not played NFL snaps since 2018. I mean, they think this guy. I mean, there's people out there that think he could come in and start. I mean, it is it is fucking insane. And in fact, I decided today, because we'll talk a little bit about Breeland Speaks and just the pass rush in general before we talk about the wide receiver position group. But I didn't know PFF does UFL charting and all that kind of stuff too. So it was really fun to see. The only reason that he got Defensive Player of the Year is just because of the sacks, which he got most of those sacks in 2 games. But there were other more effective players. So it's pathetic how bad Titans fans just cling like, oh, UFL, Breeland Speaks, and man, this could be great. Like man, we are desperate at this point. If you have a really low opinion of from everybody to Arden Key to Caleb Murphy to think that Breeland Speaks could come in and start, especially a year removed after everybody thought that Caleb Murphy was the next big thing in the NFL.
I'll tell you exactly who Breeland Speaks is. He's the Chiefs version of Kevin Dodd. And this is like if the UFL existed when Kevin Dodd went AWOL for the Titans, and then he had like 9.5 sacks for the UFL, and then some team started talking themselves into him being a starter in the NFL. How hard would you laugh at those fans for thinking Kevin Dodd was going to be like the salvation? That's what you look like right now if you are talking up Breeland Speaks as some sort of like potential savior for the Titans pass rush.
He played in the rotation in 2018, his rookie year. And then heading into 2019, he got put on the injured reserve. Then he got suspended by the NFL in 2019. So he didn't play a lick in 2019. Then he got waived in 2020. So 2 years
after being a second-round pick.
Kansas City tenure, he got cut. A second-round pick got cut after 2 years. And then he bounced around from practice squad to practice squad, playing no meaningful snaps until he made it into the UFL and has played for the Birmingham Stallions the last 3 years. But, I mean, like, people have to get a grip. I mean, I shouldn't be amazed. We've been doing this since 2018. I shouldn't be amazed at the depravity of the Titans fan base who just they just have no fucking no shame. There's just no shame among the Titans fan base. Like Denzel, remember everybody wanted Denzel Mims for them to trade for Denzel Mims last year or to sign Denzel Mims. He just got cut today. He got cut at the end of the day. The people who wanted to trade for Chase Claypool, who thought that Golden Tate deserved a chance and was the next great thing. Just no fucking shame. And I should not be surprised. But the Breeland Speaks thing was just hilarious. And I've even got, and I know, Stoney, you got an opinion, but I do got to mention real quick, Bluegrass Beverages, Hendersonville, Tennessee, our sponsor, great sponsor, been in business for over 50 years. A lot of you, I guess, have been visiting Bluegrass Beverages and buying from Bluegrass Beverages. We greatly appreciate it because you'd have to be drunk to think that Breeland Speaks is going to start for the Tennessee Titans in 2024 if he were signed. Stoney, are you drunk or sober when it comes to Breeland Speaks?
I don't care. I mean, so it came out that like the Titans and the Panthers were the 2 teams that were sniffing around. Like, yeah, bring the kid to camp. Who cares? But to act like he's going to be some savior, I don't get it. It's June, I guess. I mean, we're clinging on to hope. I don't know. Like, why can't we be having Carl Lawson conversations? Like, that makes sense. Why are we spending so much time and effort on this? I don't get it, man. But I've also been kind of out of the Titans Twitter bubble this week. It's been a really busy week here at Sobros HQ. Literally, our film critic, Brandon Vick, just left my house like 2 minutes before we went on the air. We just wrapped up 2 shows. So I haven't even had time to really pay attention to what's going on. But I did see this circulating the group chats a couple of times last night and was just like, what are we on right now, guys? What are we doing here?
Look, the UFL is a cool thing, right? It's serving.
I love the UFL.
Purpose.
Yes,
because it's serving its purpose. Because if you saw this week, I think it was on Tuesday, all these all this stuff, all these signings became official, and there was like 10 or 12 signings from the UFL, which is great, right? It's great
Yeah.
that you find guys to provide depth. But that's what this is, right? Outside of kickers, these guys are not providing true, meaningful, contributing value to an NFL team. There's a reason they are in the UFL. This is to fix the depth issue in the NFL, not to fix the starting roster issue. And I think that's where people fail to remember that there's a reason the UFL has enough players to have leagues and have games, is because there's enough players that are fringe. Maybe they are NFL level players back into the 53. Maybe they're not. But these guys aren't. The UFL is not, there is no, I guess, league. It's okay. The UFL is not the AEW and WWE.
Yes.
NFL's WWE. AEW has top tier talent that can compete in WWE, and we've lost Mike on this analogy, but there are top tier talent on AEW that can main event WWE matches, and vice versa. There's WWE. This UFL is not that. These aren't main eventers. These are your WCW main event or whatever. What was the Sunday Night Heat or Saturday Night Heat?
Sunday Night Heat, yeah.
These are the D plus players that may be able to make it in depth rotations.
I would even argue there's a layer of players in between the NFL and the UFL, because there's like a whole class of guys that might not make an NFL roster, but they're still fringe enough that they're not going to go play in the UFL because they're still trying to make it to an NFL camp or trying to cling on to an NFL roster. I might use a guy like Keaton Ellis that the Titans brought in as an undrafted free agent. Keaton Ellis is not going to get cut from the Titans, I don't think anyway, going to get cut from the Titans and then immediately go play for the Birmingham Stallions. He's still going to be close enough to the NFL that he's probably going to try and ride that out for a little bit. What you're getting in the UFL are guys that have been there's a lot of guys that didn't make rosters a couple of years ago. There's a lot of Breeland Speaks in there, guys that are kind of at a point in their career where they're like clinging on to the dream at this point, finding any way to get onto the field to put tape out there. And I'm not knocking them for that, but I'm just saying, like, I kind of feel like the separation between the UFL and NFL is oversimplified by a lot of people, just saying these are the guys that didn't cut it in the NFL. I think it's more, these are the guys that didn't cut it in the NFL for like a couple of years now and are trying to hang on there.
Look, my boy PJ Hall's still floating around in the UFL, and
I was a
big PJ Hall guy coming out. So Dalen Mack is out there. Daniel Wise, a couple of names from that. I think they were all in the same class too. It feels like.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Settle down, people. Speaks is not come. Just quit trying to speaks it into existence, because he is not coming, and he's not. If he does come, he's not starting.
So you're saying,
let's be honest,
you're saying I should cancel the Breeland Speaks Film Friday?
Yes, you should.
Okay,
cancel that
got
film
it.
Friday. Stick with the Elijah Molden Film Friday
All
for
right.
all the haters who are upset that the Tennessee Titans have stuck with Elijah Molden so far. So I do want to get into that, because the contract numbers showed up for Marcus May, which were strictly vet minimum, contract numbers. And when Marcus May got signed, we heard that several teams showed interest. And I want to break that down a little bit. Several teams showed interest. Okay. At one point. Yeah. Like, that's how we need to kind of take that right now, because if you look at the contract, obviously several teams weren't interested enough to beat a vet minimum contract. Right? So that means that he visited and he did not pass physicals, or the physicals looked bad enough. And so he went to a team that has a championship roster team that doesn't need a starting safety. And so he gets to kind of sit on the back end and not compete or anything. And that kind of tells me right there is that I think that everybody bought into the hype of, well, several teams were interested, so he must be getting paid a lot. And really, it's probably more likely several teams were interested at the beginning of free agency, and then that was it. And then just Miami was willing to pay him anything at that point. Yeah, Mike, your thoughts?
It seems like, to me, it screams that injury stuff that his medicals probably did not come back great. Because teams may have been interested based off the tape, but when they get him in for medicals, and he's got enough of a medical background now over the last few years from an injury standpoint that he's a guy that you would want to have checked out probably personally. My guess is that the medical teams did not feel great about it, and the Dolphins ended up being the team that was most willing to go ahead and bring him in and take the risk of the injury situation with him. But this tells me certainly, because I mean his history with Denard Wilson, the fact that he has at least somewhat recently been a quality starter in the NFL level, you would think he would make sense here. Even if you like Elijah Molden as a starter, you still need a third guy, because even if you're happy with Elijah Molden, you're not. Surely there's not fans out there that are like excited about Mike Brown or Matthew Jackson getting into the game, because they will play. Like, your third safety does play. So you would need a third that's better than what they currently have as a third, I think, which is why I still think something happens at that position between now and training camp. But clearly there was something that threw them off, because otherwise, could you beat the veteran minimum by $1? Sure, probably, and give him more opportunity to play. Yeah. So it seems to me like something got the Titans off of him.
Well, and I think this speaks to bigger things, Stoney, is that like we trashed them for their approach to the linebacker position all off season long. And one of those guys that I really wanted them to sign was Jerome Baker, because I felt Jerome Baker was a great compliment. And he came into the building and they let him leave. And he gets up to Seattle, gets a modest, contract, and everything. And you're just kind of like, man, why'd they let him leave? Well, this Marcus May thing kind of puts it back into a different perspective again, because not only did Jerome Baker obviously have medical concerns, he's now missing part of training camp, and now he's threatening just to move out of the United States right now. He's put out some crazy tweets talking about that he's going to move out of the United States, which I think he still could play in the NFL, even if that's the case. But like his injury concerns are lingering well into the offseason as well. So you kind of makes you think, okay, maybe that right there, he probably left without a contract offer because, again, the medicals did not look good, which kind of puts the Tennessee Titans in a weird position right now, that we know that this is a new new medical team, but that medical team wasn't there for the Jerome Baker stuff. But we do know that Chad Brinker has this medical injury algorithm, floating around back there. So it kind of feels like a different approach even in that area from years past, because it feels like a Jerome Baker or maybe even a Marcus May would have been a pretty easy signing the previous regime would have made despite injury issues. What are your thoughts on that, Stoney?
Well, I like the decision. I'm glad you bring up Jerome Baker, because it's another dot to connect here. It kind of strikes me as evidence that this regime is going to play the patient game instead of just desperately throwing resources out to fill holes. Now, you could say, well, it's not a very big hole. You're talking about a vet minimum safety deal, and you're talking about a linebacker that's probably on the cheaper end of the free agency spectrum. But it's still this regime looking at these two situations and presumably thinking, well, there's medical stuff here. Let's not devote resources to stuff to people that we know have a track record, a proven, demonstrated injury history. Let's roll with what we got. Let's draft. Let's bring in undrafted free agents and evaluate what we have with upside, instead of bringing in guys, no matter the cost, no matter the resource, that could potentially miss time due to injury. And like you said, the situation with Jerome Baker already proving, to me, in my mind, proving Rand Carthon and Chad Brinker and company right about letting him leave town without the deal. I think this strategy kind of shows a sense of patience and commitment to the plan, that they're not going to desperately reach for somebody with an injury history, no matter the resource. And I kind of like it myself. I'm cool with it.
I am with you, Mike. I'm half in, half out on a tweet that you had last week that we talked about on the show. I think Elijah Molden is a fine starting safety, and Stoney has been watching the tape and over on. If you go back and watch the Tampa Bay game, all 22, I think you might
Oh, I
change your
loved it.
mind.
I loved
He
it.
loved it. So tomorrow, on Friday, on Stacking the Inbox Film Fridays, Elijah Molden propaganda video. All good Elijah Molden all the time. I'm fine with Elijah Molden starting at safety for a few different reasons. One, I think a second year at the position he's learned a lot from last year. And I think he's a smart enough player that I don't think you necessarily need mega athleticism and size at that position. If you look at Geno Stone, for instance, but he's a smart guy that will be in the right place at the right time, that can cover tight ends and all that kind of stuff. And I like that Denard Wilson is there. However, I do understand that first off, Justin Simmons, despite James Foster's saying that Justin Simmons or Elijah Molden over Justin Simmons in our group chat, I recognize that Justin Simmons is a superior talent. And I recognize that maybe Marcus May is better than current Elijah Molden. But I also understand that the depth is atrocious. So I am with you. Like, if you bring in an Eddie Jackson, I think Elijah Molden beats out Eddie Jackson. And that's fine, as long as you're not paying Eddie Jackson some, like, big freaking amount of money.
Which nobody's
But
getting
you
at the point
need
besides maybe
depth
Simmons.
behind Elijah Molden and Amani Hooker, especially because even though that they have been relatively healthier, they have had their own issues staying healthy in different parts of the year and different parts of their career. So you need depth. And listen, the depth at safety is worse than the depth at linebacker. It is probably I think my least favorite depth position. Probably. I mean, it's bad, right,
It's
Mike?
awful.
I know that you're anti-Elijah Molden, but I'm with you. Full on depth needs to be had at the safety position.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily anti Elijah Molden. I've liked Molden since he came out, since he was drafted. Really, I don't know. I've struggled with him seeing what he could be as a full time player at any position, really, because I feel like almost his best use is in that kind of nickel dime package, extra defensive back role where he can kind of be a pseudo linebacker for you because he does tackle well. He plays around the line of scrimmage well. He's not fast enough to run with anybody in man coverage, which is a problem, I think, in this defense, which is part of why I'm hesitant to say I'm real comfortable with him as a starter, because you're going to have some split safety stuff, but you're also going to have some plays where they're going to want to roll a safety down and put him on a tight end. And at Molden's size and speed, I think he's not a great matchup for anybody in man coverage that you're going to see regularly. So that's my holdup with him as like a full-time guy. Now, again, like if you wanted to platoon him with somebody, I could see that. But I don't think they have the guy that you platoon him with on the roster currently. So I think they certainly need to add somebody. I would prefer it be Justin Simmons, just because I think it'd be fun to see what this secondary could look like. Kind of fully loaded with a veteran back there that has played at a really high level over recent seasons. And just see, how good the secondary could really be with that group, and let Bolden kind of be in that supplementary role that I think he's really good at, frankly. And I think he's a playmaker. I think he does a lot of stuff that I like. I just don't, the physical skill set is limiting at some point for certain schemes, right? So I don't know. That's kind of where I am with the whole Molden thing. It's not the end of the world if he's your starter, but could they do better? I think so.
But isn't it really just Stoney? Justin Simmons is the only better option. I mean, like, we know for sure.
I think that, Quandre Diggs. I'd say Quandre Diggs is better too.
I was going to bring
I'm
his
not a big
name up as
Quandre
well.
Diggs. I'm not a Quandre Diggs guy.
Nah, it's because he went to Texas, and you've got Texas vendetta because you don't.
No, because I don't think. I mean, you're talking about just worse Kevin Byard, in my opinion.
Well, look, I don't know. I won't pretend to be up to date on the latest news on Micah Hyde, but I see he's out there, and I know he was good at some point. Is just the injuries completely derail his career too? Is that why he's still out there?
Yeah.
And he's sneaky old too. He's like 33 or 34. He's really getting up there. So I think it's a injuries plus age thing for him.
Yeah,
but I agree. Like, I wouldn't be terribly upset if they wanted to platoon him and Molden, like just kind of, let those guys work together a little bit. I don't know. But I think they should add somebody.
I don't know if it's just cope or what, but I'm looking at it and like, okay, you know what, Eddie Jackson, I think I can get behind this in a supporting role. But I think it's just because I'm of the same mindset as you guys, that just the depth at safety in general. I think if Elijah Molden stays healthy, he can be fine. And I think in playing safety and seeing how deep they dropped him last year, I think that's where he can excel, is if you drop him super deep and have him come back to the play. You don't have him necessarily cover guys one-on-one, but maybe he's there as coverage support. Like there were a lot of plays that I saw receivers one-on-one with a cornerback, but Elijah Molden creeps over the top to kind of cap the route and make sure, like, hey, if this guy gets behind this cornerback, I'm going to be here to make the tackle. Very kind of safe style for him. He gets one-on-one. If he's trying to press somebody at the line and they get behind him, they get around him, it's ball game. But if he can stay healthy, I think he can be a pretty good safety. But man, if he goes down to injury, like there's no depth here. And that's where I'm with you guys at. And I think that's created a sense of desperation in me where I'm like, you know what? Eddie Jackson might work. Keanu Neal is still out there. Let's, kick the tires on Keanu Neal too.
Tayshaun Gibson. I wouldn't hate it,
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
It's rough sledding out there if you're looking for safety help right now. But
John Johnson's
they're all
juice left.
Yeah, they're all better than probably what they have behind the two starters right now. But let's talk about the wide receiver position group, which is one of the more deeper positions out there for the Tennessee Titans. They are currently, the Titans are ranked 7th in cap space used on wide receivers in 2024, with $42.8 million of their cap space allocated to the wide receiver position. And they are 4th in cash spent at the position in 2024 with $52.4 million. That right there, it doesn't matter who's on the team. For me, like if you were a Tennessee Titans fan from 2022 and you were just instantly taken out of your timeline and plucked into Wednesday, June 19th, 2024, and all you know is that the Tennessee Titans are spending $42.9 million in cap space on the wide receiver position and $52.4 million in cash, you have changed this entire team's outlook at the wide receiver position, because you would get sticker shot. You would not know what to do, because this feels like, and I have not fact checked this, because A.J. Brown was on a rookie contract and there was no one really getting paid a lot behind A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. But this has got to be easily the most the Titans have spent on the wide receiver position. And that just is, I knew they spent a lot, but when I actually pulled up these numbers, I was like, wow, that right there lets you know this ain't your daddy's Tennessee Titans. Stoney, what were your first reactions when I just told you those numbers? Like, what was going on in your head?
It's just, like it feels unprecedented for this organization that for so long we've been fans of, watching and begging for premier wide receiver play. Not just that, but like get guys that are serviceable in here. And even at times throughout this organization's history, it's felt like they can't even get the top guy right. Like and I don't mean to throw shade at Drew Bennett. I love Drew Bennett, but for years when we're like, yes, Drew Bennett's our guy, like it's conditioned Titans fans for so long to just be miserable at that position. You're just constantly in a state of begging for competent wide receiver play. And now we're at a spot in this franchise's history where they've got a receiving core that I think is probably the deepest it's ever been, at least on paper. Again, haven't played a down with these guys together under Brian Callahan in this offense. But I mean, looking at it on paper, it's not just that they've dedicated the money to it, but it's the name value they have. Like 2 years ago, imagine saying DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, and Tyler Boyd are going to be the top 3 receivers for this Titans franchise coming up. It seems like a true changing of the guard type of moment for this organization.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Mike? I mean, just on the overall state of the wide receiver room for the Tennessee Titans and just how much different 2024 is compared to any other year the Tennessee Titans that you followed.
It's very different. I would say it's closest to the year that they had AJ and Julio and who was the other one? Was it Humphreys that was still
NWI.
there? No, but there was somebody else who
No,
was
I don't
supposed to
know.
be the
Did
third.
Hump
But
and
Humphreys,
Julio actually cross
I
paths?
think they did. I think
I
that
can't
was the
remember.
last year that Humphreys was here. I'll have to look that up. But either
Khalif
way, I think
Raymond.
that's
No,
the was it not?
Julio was 2021. So
Mhm.
no, he was already in Washington by then.
Okay.
So
All
his
right.
last
So
year was in
I'm
2020.
who am I thinking was the third guy then? Oh, maybe that was the year when they had like
WI?
Chester Rogers and Marcus Johnson
Yeah.
and all those guys that we all got excited about at camp, and then they all sucked.
Well, that year that Julio was on the team, Nick Westbrook was the second most targeted receivers over Julio
How about that?
Jones. So he was the 3, but Chester Rogers
Yeah.
is who you're thinking of, and Marcus Johnson, your boy,
My boy
Marcus
Nice.
Hey,
Johnson.
Marcus will always have that 100-yard game against the Saints. Marcus will always have that. But I do think it was that year was probably the closest to it. But again, even your third that year was not close to what Tyler Boyd is, and your fourth certainly wasn't close to what Treylon Burks is, even as down on Treylon Burks as everyone is. It's the most depth that they've ever had there. But at the same time, I guess my outlook on the position is I'm really excited to watch this group play together. Really fired up about it. But I'm also concerned about the long-term future of this group because they're all old, right? Like all the top line guys are old and we just don't know what Burks is. So happy, thrilled for 2024, a little scared for 2025 and beyond.
Well, I was going to do a 2023 review, but I don't think anybody really needs us to relive the disaster that was the wide receiver core in 2023. It was just DeAndre Hopkins, and then everybody else existed in Nashville. But there was something that popped up into my head. I can't remember what I was watching or listening to or whatever, but people were talking about arm strength and, targeting wide receivers and all this kind of stuff. And the Tennessee Titans wide receivers the starters largely spent their time catching passes from Ryan Tannehill. And I think we all agree that Will Levis and Ryan Tannehill have different levels of arm strength. But I thought this was I think this was based off Josh Allen maybe, or maybe even Matt Stafford. But how much do you all think, specifically last year, the strength at which Will Levis can heave the pigskin, the velocity it hits in the wide receiver's hands at the force of impact and everything, how much do you think that maybe led to some of the drops, as well as, maybe a little bit of lack of chemistry? But how much do you think that are we underplaying or underrating that maybe the arm strength could have led to the high number of drops that Will Levis saw?
I think so, for sure. I mean, the thing that immediately comes to mind for me is not a wide receiver, but it's that drop that Chig had in the Tampa Bay game where the ball just kind of hit his hands and just completely ricocheted up into the stands. It was thrown so hard. I think the thing that I would give credence to is the difference between Ryan Tannehill's velocity and Will Levis's velocity, particularly in 2023. Because Zach, you and I talked about it. It seemed like after every game from week one, we're like, oh gosh, is Tannehill cooked? Is he just completely lost his arm strength? And every week we were having the same conversation. So to go from that to Will Levis, who has a cannon in multiple ways, to go from Tannehill to Levis, I think is an adjustment that they couldn't make on the fly. You were making on the fly to get used to that. Now you've had an off season to get used to it. You're working with it a little more. I don't anticipate it being an issue because of that, because you have had time to make the adjustment. But in the moment in 2023, I can absolutely see it being a contributing factor to the drops that the receivers and tight ends had.
Yeah,
I can just real quick. To add to this real quick, because someone in the chat said something about Brett Favre pistol grip, which is a great name for the time for this canon conversation with Will Levis. But if you look at the drop percentages just from 2006 to 2010, this is on PFF, so this is the only time that they were able to do it. In fact, they have actually weirdly 1996 on here. So in 1996, 17.6% of his passes were dropped in 1996. 17.6. The highest, I think, this year was I think that Will Levis at 8.5 or something. Okay, so 2006, 11.1%, 8% in 2007, 8.8% in 2008, 2009 was 6.9, then 2010 was 9.2. Those are some pretty high drop percentages, and I'm kind of thinking that maybe there is some kind of correlation between the receivers' arm strength and drop. Maybe not a high correlation or anything, but I do think there is something to it. Mike, I'll let you take over from there.
Yeah, I would say there likely is. I mean, it's certainly more difficult to catch something that's coming in at, close to 70 miles an hour versus something that's coming in closer to 50 miles an hour, right? Anybody that's played baseball or any other sport that involves catching can tell you that. But I think it has to be correlated. And I do think the point that Stoney made about the transition from Tannehill to Levis is an important one because, they were not used to that. And the ball just gets on you faster, right? It's not even just that it's harder to catch. It's just that your timing and everything else that you're used to is all sped up and you've got to adjust to that. So I think working with him, getting used to it over the period, of the off season and being able to work and ramp up to it over the course of a training camp will make a big difference. Because a lot of those guys, even Hopkins and most of the other starters, frankly, for the Titans, we're not working with Levis in camp. I mean, he was working with the threes a lot, sometimes with the twos and stuff like that. But not a lot of exposure to his arm strength during camp until they were just thrown into it during a game week. So I think that's a big part of it. And certainly would not surprise me if that's correlated between the two.
Yeah, to me, it just kind of looking at it, I'm just like, you look at Josh Allen, he has pretty much above average drop rates as well. We know Trevor Lawrence suffered really bad last year or this past season, but other than that, he kind of hasn't for the most part. What I did think was interesting, though, if you started looking at who had the highest drop rates, it was Will Levis. Then it goes to Aiden O'Connell, Ryan Tannehill, and Kirk Cousins. It was like
Ooh.
Will Levis, and then I was looking at point very well. That's Aiden O'Connell, Kirk Cousins, and Ryan Tannehill. But Kirk Cousins in 8 games. Okay, he started 8 games, suffered 20 drops last year, which is an insane amount of drops for just playing in 8 games. That's kind of a high amount right there for just one guy to have to suffer through. The Mike Clay of NFL, I think he's of ESPN, but it's Mike Clay NFL or whatever. He's a big fantasy guy. We've talked about him on the show before. Me and Mike have actually broken down. We did an over-under one year at Mike's house for an episode of just going through where he was possibly wrong or right in his projections. I don't know where we ever ended up on that. We do things like this. We do predictions on the show, and then we never really go back to see, well, how did our over-unders look? Because at that point, we probably have forgotten because of other stuff has happened. But he has the Tennessee Titans as the 8th best wide receiver core in the NFL, the trio. And that's Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, and Tyler Boyd. And I think that's about right. I think top 10, I think it's a great top 10. It's drastically different. He has Calvin Ridley with 1,009 yards and 7 touchdowns, DeAndre Hopkins with 1,027 yards and 5 touchdowns, and Tyler Boyd with 581 yards and 2 touchdowns. So just to talk about that for a second, I mean, are you guys, because it feels like the Tennessee Titans wide receiver core is kind of getting a little bit slept on for the most part, but do you guys think that they are the 8th best or roughly the 8th best wide receiver trio in the entire NFL? Stoney,
I think they could be. I think they could be. I'm kind of in the middle on this where I kind of feel like the national media is probably sleeping on how good this trio can be. But at the same time, I also kind of feel like Titans fans are a little too optimistic about it as well. I think a lot of factors still have to go well for this team for them to really be effective on paper at the very least. I do think this is probably, you stack them up 1 through 3. I do think this is probably a top 10 unit on paper, but I'm not going to be, an injury could affect that. Obviously, listen, I've made fun of the Trevor Lawrence highlight reel with all the errant passes that are too high for Calvin Ridley, that everybody says, oh, these are Calvin Ridley drops. I've made fun of Trevor Lawrence for that. But I mean, what if these are issues with Calvin Ridley and he's not what we think he's going to be? I think there is a timeline where the offensive line is not as improved as we think it's going to be. That's going to impact the passing game. And ultimately, looking at the production, I think it's possible that this team could be, or this unit could be, a little underwhelming. But at the same time, as we talked about earlier, it's also the deepest this group has ever been. And I think if executed to 100% of the vision and the potential, I think this could be as high as maybe a top 5 unit in the NFL.
Mike, what are your thoughts on this overall unit?
I'd agree. I mean, for example, just looking at his ranking list here, I would still probably have like the Vikings and the Rams over the Titans groups. And I know, like, if you just look at the third guy, probably not as good as Tyler Boyd, but the first two, are probably better than what the Titans got in those cases. So
Nakua is the best wide receiver in the league. So,
well, yeah, sure, of course. But I don't know. I think it's about right. I mean, I'd probably slot him in that 8 to 10 range. I don't know that I'd go much further down than that, just looking at the list. So, certainly I would say second best in the division behind Houston, who by the way, Clay had number 1. It was Houston's wide receiver room. So,
and I don't think I agree. And maybe from a fantasy perspective, I could be talked into it, but just off the cuff, I just don't really think I'm that sold on that wide receiver core being number 1. But I understand this is purely for fantasy purposes, which brings me to my next question that you guys may not be prepared for. How high are you drafting Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins? Like, where would you target those guys? I would feel like 4th round for Calvin Ridley and maybe 6th round for DeAndre Hopkins. What about you guys?
I would feel really good with either of those as like my solid set wide receiver 2.
Gotcha.
And wide receiver 2 is coming like 4 through 6.
Yeah. And I would agree with that generally. I'd say Hopkins to me, and I don't know who's going higher between the two. I would assume Ridley. But Hopkins, I think, scores more touchdowns. I think Ridley will end up with more yards. So depending on how your league weights that from a fantasy perspective, I'd say may dictate which one should go higher. But they probably should go in about the same range, in that kind of mid wide receiver 2 kind of range.
So it looks like DeAndre Hopkins is currently being drafted at 77th overall, the 37th wide receiver off the board. Ooh. And Calvin Ridley is being drafted. He's right above DeAndre Hopkins, actually, but he is being drafted 66th overall and drafted as the 36th best wide receiver in the NFL for half-point PPR. So just some information right there for that. And it looks like at least I'm frozen on my end. Am I frozen on your all's end as well? But my audio is going
frozen
frozen at a fantastic point here. I don't know what is going on. Maybe it's this porn bot coming in here.
Probably.
But let me do something real quick because it looks like it's just my
someone take a picture of the screen and make sure to post it on Twitter.
Oh, I got it. I got the screenshot.
But as I'm getting this fixed, I do think that there is still an issue here with the Tennessee Titans wide receiver core that nobody has really talked about. And Calvin Ridley can generate separation, obviously. He's got the speed and everything.
Yeah.
But he didn't really generate a lot of separation last year. Tyler Boyd, DeAndre Hopkins did not generate a lot of separation last year as well. I think Tyler Boyd, out of 3 wide receivers, had the most or the highest average separation per target, according to Next Gen Stats, which is still that's not a good thing. And where are you guys at on the separation issue? Obviously, Calvin Ridley was deployed a little bit differently than he is used to. He's usually not on the line, seeing a lot of press man at the line like he did last year. He's usually a little bit backed off the line. But where are you at on your level of concern for the separation issues that the Tennessee Titans may still have at wide receiver?
I'm cautiously optimistic myself. I think you're right to kind of have this worry on the horizon, Zach. I think my counter to it would be the scheme that Brian Callahan is attempting to implement. And from what we're hearing at the mini camps and OTAs and all that, guys are getting open because of the scheme. And maybe that compensates for some of the pure separation abilities. So I remain hopeful that that can overcome the separation issues. But I think if we get into meaningful NFL game action and the scheme alone is not enough to get guys open, I think that's when it becomes a concern.
Mike, what about you?
I'm kind of in a similar boat. To me, I guess I have less concern with Ridley just because I've seen him do it before. I don't think he was put in a great situation last year in Jacksonville with what he was asked to do, playing the X, not being able to get to move and get a running start off the ball, that kind of thing. I think they're going to do a lot more of that here in Tennessee with him. So I think you're going to see a lot of separation for Ridley, but I think it's a concern elsewhere because I don't think Hopkins separates at a great level anymore. Boyd doesn't for sure, never really did, to be honest. And Burks, that's the weakness in his game. So that's why I think they almost had to spend that kind of money on Calvin Ridley because that was such a huge problem for them. You can't have just 4 of the exact same guys out there that, none of them can separate. They all kind of do the same thing. But anyways, I just kind of feel like I'm not concerned so much about Ridley. I am concerned about the other guys. And I'll say also, unless Burks can refine this mojo, I do think that there's a problem with run after the catch ability here because I don't think any of these guys really are dynamic after the catch, with the exception of maybe Burks, who really that was in college, has not translated as we've talked about in recent episodes here. But I think if Burks can get that back, that's a big deal. But if not, that's going to be a limiting factor for this group as well.
Well, Mike Clay thinks that, let's see here, that Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins will both have 129 targets thrown their way. So they're perfectly even. Out of those two, who do you actually think ends up with the most targets?
I would guess Ridley.
Start with you, Mike. Ridley? What about you?
Yeah, I'm going to guess Ridley.
I'm going to go with Hopkins because I think he's a reception machine, and I think he's already got a little bit of the rapport with Will Levis. I think he might rack up more of the targets just being more of a safety valve.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. I think that the rapport between him and Hopkins will probably supersede what Calvin Ridley sees, but maybe I would love to be pleasantly surprised, though. I'd rather it be Calvin Ridley, but I'm not going to be upset if it is DeAndre Hopkins. But I kind of lead DeAndre Hopkins as well, just for that specific issue. That leads us to talk about some of the other wide receivers on this team. And Pistol Grip, again, who's having an all-star inaugural day. I don't remember ever seeing Pistol Grip here. But the new dude from Tulane, Jaquan Jackson, may give us some speed. And I don't think any of us are the biggest Jaquan Jackson fans. In fact, Mike didn't even really want to talk about Jaquan Jackson. He told me that, man, I really don't even want to talk about Jaquan Jackson.
Well, I saw you had his name listed twice on the rundown, and I was like, that's at least one time too many.
Yeah, that's true. One of them is for 2025, though. But for Jaquan Jackson, he had a great article up over at Broadway Sports Media with his interview with Justin Mello, where he is talking about everything that he is learning, put together, his relationship with that started to build with Tyke Tolbert at his pro day. How this was a Tyke Tolbert dude. Jaquan Jackson is obviously a Tyke Tolbert dude. Whether that's a good thing or not, we don't know. But everything that he is doing, he knows he's learning how to attack press coverage from the slot. He's learning all this stuff. So I think we're under the assumption that Jaquan Jackson is going to play a role in special teams more than likely punt returner, I would assume. And that Jaquan Jackson will probably be the backup to Tyler Boyd, the main backup to that slot only position. If that's what they choose to, if they choose to keep it very segregated, we're like, we want a slot guy there for these plays, like a guy that knows how to play the slot. That will likely be Jaquan Jackson, I would assume. Still early. We still haven't seen, the pads come on and all that kind of stuff. But I'm going to start with Mike since he doesn't want to talk about Jaquan Jackson. I'm going to make him talk about Jaquan Jackson first. A lot of Tennessee Titans fans, Mike, and we talked about this at the top of the show, how they have no shame. This isn't a jab at you, Pistol Grips. I don't want you to scare you off or anything. But a lot of people think that Jaquan Jackson is the next big thing, and they're horny for Jaquan. Like for JQ, they are horny for JQ magazine over there. So I ask you, Mike, what should be the actual expectations for Jaquan Jackson? Is he going to be just a role player? Is he going to make some Khalif Raymond type plays where maybe you see some glimpses? Like, what do you think is a realistic view of what Jaquan Jackson can do for this team as a wide receiver? We're excluding special teams from this.
My real answer is that it's a disappointment if he sees the field in 2024 on offense. I think he's a special teams guy this year. The most ideal outcome for him would be that he's like Khalif Raymond-ish. I think it would be like an ideal, like they hit a home run on their evaluation of him kind of situation. I think I just don't expect him to see the field much. I don't think he's going to be a big part of the offense. They didn't go sign Tyler Boyd to give snaps to Jaquan Jackson. I mean, they're going to play Tyler Boyd almost every snap in the slot. And then, maybe he needs a breather, 5 or 6 snaps a game. They throw Jaquan Jackson in there probably for some run plays. I don't know. Like, I just don't think it's going to be a big
end arounds that he fumbles like Traylon Burks and Malik Willis and Jig.
Right, yeah, some turnover plays. I just don't think he's going to be any significant part of the offense. I'd be shocked if he outsnapped Nick Westbrook-Akine, frankly, on offense.
Well, you think NWI is going to be like wide receiver 2 or something, so you got high hopes.
Wide receiver 5.
Yeah, you love you some NWI. Stoney, is Mike being too harsh on Jaquan Jackson, or is he probably 100% right?
Yeah, I think he's probably closer to right. And listen, we've heard a lot about this being a 3-year rebuild, right? Or like Brian Callahan, I can't remember who, was talking about how this is going to be a process. It's not going to happen overnight. And we're in this for the long haul. I look at the drafting of Jaquan Jackson as a head start on the future of that Tyler Boyd position. Like, I don't think they're going to count on him in that slot role right away. And maybe this is just insurance for Tyler Boyd. Maybe he's just a part of the plan for down the line. Hey, we want to get this guy in. We want to refine some of the things that he does well so that when it comes time for him to step into this role, he's ready for it. And to Pistol Grip's comments, I think this offseason they've positioned themselves well to get a really good wide receiver in next year's draft as well. So I could see Jaquan Jackson being a piece geared more towards the future than he is the immediate, the here and now. I like his ability as a route runner. I think he's a really crafty, jukey guy. My question was with the outright speed. I don't remember what exactly he ran at the combine, but it surprised me a little bit.
It's 4.42.
Yeah, because same issue as Luke McCaffrey. Like you watch the tape, and I don't know if it's just the quarterback play at that level of competition, but there's a lot of slowing down, hitting the brakes to come back to the ball kind of deal that maybe it makes these guys look slower than they really are. I'm just spitballing here, but I can't also sit here and say I really love the addition of Tyke Tolbert as the wide receivers coach and then not trust him that this is a guy that he likes with conviction. I'm kind of in line with Mike. I think it's probably a bad situation if Jaquan Jackson is seeing a lot of meaningful snaps in 2024. I can have my hope for the future, but be a little more realistic about today. And that's where I say, punt returner, occasional gadgety guy, the Khalif Raymond role, that all works for me. I've got no problem with that. But I think, we do need to kind of pump the brakes on the expectations a little bit.
Well, speaking of expectations, Treylon Burks has pretty much zero expectations coming into the 2024 season. But there's a growing sentiment, and Braden kind of alluded to this being a good sentiment to have, and that is Treylon Burks, kickoff returner, which makes sense in my mind, right? If you're looking, because we had talked about, right, you're looking for guys that are maybe running backs are more apt to get the kickoff return job under the new rules, and that their style of play and their body type or whatever lends themselves to maybe be finding more success. We have no clue because we don't know. I don't think anybody knows what this kickoff return rule is going to be till like week 8. The NFL will finally agree on how to properly utilize this new rule to their advantage. But I look at Treylon Burks, who has the body type of a guy that we know has gotten yards after catch. We know that he does well in end arounds. He has speed. He kind of gets up to speed, kind of like Derrick Henry. Takes him a while to get up to top speed, but he's got that kind of chunk build. He's a chunky boy. And I think that Treylon Burks as a kickoff returner is what you should start with. I would rather, you're going to have 2 guys back there probably, and I would like one of those guys to be Treylon Burks, and I would hope that he would be the one designated to find the ball for more often than not. Mike, what are your thoughts on maybe it won't ever redeem him as a first-round pick unless he becomes Devin Hester, but what do you think as of Treylon Burks as being what should be the top option at kickoff returner, but he still has to earn it?
Yeah, I'm not opposed to it. And I think I've said this before here, but I still kind of lean towards the running backs, Spears and Pollard as the guys that you're probably most going to want back there. But if they just decide that those guys are too important to the offense or too, critical that they can't put them back there, I think Burks might be my next choice. Because I do think it's going to be more like a running play than it is going to be like a kick return, right? Like in a traditional sense anyway. So I think you're going to want somebody who can run through some arm tackles because it's going to be, it's going to be more like a run play to me. So I think Burks has that skill set to some degree, or at least in theory, again, like if he can figure out how to break tackles again. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out because the more I've thought about it, the more I'm like, they're probably going to end up having 2 returners back there, right? Like one on one side, one on the other, because you're not going to want that guy to have to run a long way, to try to field the ball. And then you're kind of moving in that direction and you're kind of hemmed in already, right? Like I think you're going to want a little bit. Yeah, I think you're going to want 2 players back there ultimately, I'm super excited to see how teams play this out because there's going to be so many different. I think you're going to see teams throw shit at the wall and see what sticks, and then everyone's going to copy it. And I can't wait to see all the different shit that people try. It's going to be great for like a year, and then everyone's going to, copy the one method that worked the best, and then it'll just be, vanilla from there on. But this year is going to be so much fun with this rule. I can't wait.
Well, I mean, what are your guys' thoughts? Because we've talked a little bit about this, but what are your guys' thoughts on how many wide receivers to actually keep on the roster? I'm leaning towards 7 right now, but I'm more close to leaning 6 than anything else.
So who would be that 7th guy for you then? Let's run through.
So we would have so someone's gonna have to hold up their finger since my camera is out, but we got DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, Treylon Burks, NWI, Jaquan Jackson. And we know Colton Dow will technically be on the team, but I'm not technically including that because he'll be moved to PUP.
Yeah.
But he'll kind of, at some point, he may not even count towards the initial 53 anyway, because I'm sure he'll be on the PUP. Like, I guess during training camp, I think is whenever they can actually put it on there. So I'm not really counting Colton Dow on that list. I'm going to say that I think Kyle Phillips still makes it. And I know
Kyle
that's
Phillips.
wild because then you have, to me, you have two backups for the wide receivers on the outside, then you have two backups for the slot guy. That's kind of how I view it. But I'm not beholden to that quite yet. But if anything, I think Kyle Phillips is the guy that's kind of on the roster bubble, whether that's the right side or the wrong side right now.
Yeah, I go with 6, and I think I'm leaving Phillips off because I just don't know how many different ways he can help the football team. I don't know that you want Kyle Phillips back there returning kicks and punts. I mean, you have the injury
Now that they have someone actually
history.
teaching how to do it,
Well,
maybe it'll
touche.
be a little bit different.
Touche. Yeah. I would tend to lean towards 6, and maybe they keep another running back or tight end or someone like that might be better built for the returning role. No love. How do we feel about these undrafted guys from last year, Zach? Like Jaquan Jackson, Trayshawn Harrison. We're not hearing a whole lot about those guys getting much run at returner, but that's kind of what they were doing last year before they were injured. I mean, any opportunity for those guys to see the field for you?
Oh, no. I mean, preseason,
Okay.
yes, but those guys
Yeah.
shouldn't have seen the field last year, to be honest with you. I mean, obviously, Trayshawn Harrison didn't, but some people even think Reggie Roberson's still on the team, but I don't think any of the wide receivers that are undrafted are making the team. I think everybody on the team that makes wide receiver, the only undrafted guy is going to be NWI. And technically, I mean, he's been around the league now. I don't know if you really still place him in that group or not, but I mean, he's obviously a vet. But I don't think any of the last year's undrafted free agents or any of the ones that may be from this year are making this team. Mike, what about you? Where are you at? Are you sticking with 6 like you did a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, I'm at 6, and I like you said, I think Colton Dowell is kind of your 7th that you're stashing on PUP and can bring back at some point during the season when then inevitably somebody in that 6 is going to get hurt and you'll need somebody else to be able to plug in there. But I think what's going to hurt Phillips as far as making the roster is if he is not a punt returner or a kick returner, and you've got Jaquan Jackson making the roster, who is a punt returner, kick returner, and backup slot. The only thing Phillips does for you then is just backup slot. He's going to be inactive every week because he doesn't do anything else on special teams. Like he's not a punt cover guy like NWI can do, like Treylon Burks is apparently training to do. He's not going to be on kick cover. He's not going to be able to block in a punt or kick return situation. So he has zero special teams ability if he's not returning. So he has no job to do on game day. So I don't know why you would have him on the roster over anyone else. Cause I mean, I think you could, is somebody else going to claim him and put him on their 53 or can you just put him on the practice squad? And if somebody gets hurt,
well, Bill Belichick was still in the league. I would say, yes, someone's going to claim Kyle Phillips fairly easily. But I do actually think that Kyle Phillips will probably get claimed.
He might. I mean, it's possible.
I think there's a better chance, but I think that's also I know that everybody thought, listen, you sitting here questioning, wow, I don't know if I think Kyle Phillips is going to clear waivers after last year saying there's no way Caleb Murphy could clear waivers is ridiculous in my mind, by the way. I just want to call that out because obviously Kyle Phillips.
I didn't say Caleb Murphy would never clear waivers, right?
Oh, yes, you did. You and Mello were clear in the camp of, I am not sure that I think some team will snatch Caleb Murphy up. Oh, you guys.
I don't think so. We'll have to go back to the tape on that one because
I'll find some of that.
I'm fairly certain I was lukewarm on Caleb Murphy.
I do think there are teams that would take a chance on Kyle Phillips because I do think he has shown certain abilities, and maybe they don't have kick returners or punt returners on their particular team, but they can probably put in Kyle Phillips there. I don't think all teams have really good wide receiver depth currently like Tennessee Titans do. So I think that he could probably sneak in on a team somewhere. But in saying all this, we're talking about this wide receiver depth. We talked about the old wide receivers that are on this team. We talked about that a couple of them are on 1-year contracts. So we got 2 scenarios to lay out. In 2025, I do think that unless the Bengals, for whatever reason, decide that they are going to tag T. Higgins again, I think he's going to see free agency. And obviously, this would be the perfect place for him to come to, right? You'd bring in T. Higgins, you have him starting Calvin Ridley, you use that top draft pick instead of on a wide receiver, you use it on an edge player where you can likely get a really damn good edge player in that class. Jaquan Jackson could fit into that role of a slot receiver by year 2 because you guys, Ty Tolbert really believes in him. He will have a year under his belt. Maybe. I mean, I get that we objectively, that could be possible, but it's also easier to find a slot wide receiver than it is to find a starting outside wide receiver. And then Treylon Burks and NWI could stick around as the 4th and 5th again. So how do you feel about Ridley, Higgins, Jackson as your top 3, or would you rather have Higgins or Ridley, Jackson, and a draft player? Like, what do you think is the best use of the resources between those 2 scenarios? And we'll start with Mike on this one.
I would rather have Higgins because give me the sure thing, I guess, in that scenario, and especially since I can then use that draft pick elsewhere. And I think Higgins does fit in a lot of ways. Obviously, there's the Callahan part of it, and you give him a compliment in Ridley, who's a very different skill set type receiver, and I think it all kind of goes together. At that point, he'd be a natural kind of transition from DeAndre Hopkins, younger, but still the same like ball winner kind of skill set. I really like that future scenario, especially if you're not having to give up anything for him. I mean, that assumes that, I would guess that this is the case, that the Bengals won't tag him again or cannot tag him again next offseason, and he's a true free agent. As long as you're not trading for him, I'm certainly more than happy with that scenario. I would be very concerned about a scenario where you had Ridley, Jackson, and a draft pick as your only option. That to me scares the crap out of me because while I think this is going to be another pretty good wide receiver class, I don't think it's going to be quite as good as this last one. And you're probably if things go according to plan, you're probably not going to be drafting, as high as you did this year either. So
you're probably more drafting the Keon Coleman, A.D. Mitchell range in the first round, even though those guys went in the second round.
Yeah. You're in the the middle section, right? Like you're maybe in the Brian Thomas, whoever next year's Brian Thomas is. But who is probably not going to be as good as Brian Thomas, by the way. But I think I would rather have Higgins and then have the option to, if you wanted to just triple down on wide receiver again and go draft another one, I'm not opposed to that because Ridley will be over 30 at that point, and so you still kind of need to keep that.
He'll only be 26 at that point.
Well, his legs, his legs will only be 26. His birth certificate will say 30.
Stoney, you've been nodding your head in agreement, so I'd assume that you are preferring the Ridley, Higgins, Jackson trio over the trio of draft pick Ridley and Jackson.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not as high on T. Higgins as a lot of Titans fans are. I think he's probably best cast as a wide receiver too, but that's okay. Presumably, if this Ridley deal works out, he's your wide receiver 1, and T. Higgins can come in and be that ball winner. I really like that term that Mike used there, the ball winner type of wide receiver to complement Calvin Ridley. And then, you know what, I would echo Mike's sentiment too. Like if you feel like you want to throw another dart at a high pick on a wide receiver, just make that core better, continue stockpiling talent around Will Levis and building towards the future. You'd have the luxury to do that as well. So I'm 100% taking T. Higgins over the draft pick.
Yeah, I think I'm with you guys as well. I'm with Mike. I would be fine with Ridley, Higgins, Jackson draft pick as well. Somewhere a high end draft pick, not a 6th or 7th round pick draft pick, but I'd be okay. Like if they wanted to spend their 2nd round pick on a wide receiver, doing that way. I talked this week. I kind of went through contract year players on stackandinbox.com. Offense, defense, special teams, which we will be talking about some point what a Ryan Stonehouse extension looks like, because he needs an extension. He's on the final year of his contract, which has gone under the radar.
He'll be restricted though. He'll be restricted, so they can tender him and
Yeah,
protect
but you need to go ahead and just get an extension worked out for old
I
Ryan
agree.
Stonehouse.
And a second round tender is going to be pretty expensive for him. Anyway.
Yes. So my question is to you guys. I put Ridley, I think roughly at like 30 to 35%, or not Ridley, D-Hop at 30 to 35% being back next year. I don't think he will, but I do put it at a situation if everything kind of goes pretty good here for him, but also for the team in general, that I think he'd be open to re-signing. Of course, he's also probably going to be still on the cheaper side because of his age and everything, and the draft kind of hurts the older wide receivers. And I kind of put Tyler Boyd at like 70 to 80%. I put him really high that he would be back. And I want to get your thoughts on that, Mike, because I know you subscribe to Stacking Inbox, but you only read the stuff that you want to steal for paulkarski.com. So I'm sure you haven't listened to this stuff yet. But I want to get your thoughts on that because because I'm not a Jaquan Jackson believer, so that kind of bias kind of seeps in. But I also think this is kind of like a 1 year try it out deal, and then maybe his relationship kind of keeps him around at a modest contract as well, because he probably really likes Nashville. Most players that come to Nashville and stay here kind of really just like the team or like the city. And maybe he's just vibing and will stay. But I kind of put it really high, and I know I'm going to probably regret it, but I did put it at like 70 to 80%. What are your thoughts, Mike?
I guess I could maybe see him back. I wouldn't put it that high. I would put it closer to like maybe 40% that he comes back for another year. I mean, it'll depend on how it goes, right? I mean, but I think his trajectory, like Hopkins is not peak Hopkins right now, right? Like everybody kind of can admit that. It's okay. But he's still good, and I feel like he's leveled off. Like his decline is kind of leveled off, that he's kind of like he was at this level, and now he's kind of at this level, but he's kind of coasting right there. Whereas I think Boyd is kind of like, it's been going down, and it's continuing to go down pretty consistently year by year. So if he continues on his current trajectory, I wouldn't want him back if I'm the Titans. So he might be good enough this year to give him I think he's good enough to give them an upgrade over what they were going to have in the slot. But whether that's like, okay, he's really productive and great, I don't know that that's going to be the case. I think it's more likely that they don't want him back next year than it is that they don't want Hopkins back, right? So if I was handicapping the two, I'd say Hopkins more likely to be back than Boyd.
Where do you land on it, Stoney?
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of, I think I'd pick Hopkins over Boyd as more likely, but I think the same thing about loving Nashville can be said for Hopkins, who seems to be having a pretty damn good time in the city right now. The big differentiator between the two, obviously the price tag, because as Mike said, Hopkins is still playing at a pretty good level. The reason I think it is likely that Boyd could return as well, it's not exactly like he had a feverish market this offseason where people were clamoring for his services. He's already on, as you called it, Zach, a pretty modest contract. And I think he's only going to get cheaper. I think he's going to be serviceable this season for the Titans, but I don't think he's going to be highly productive necessarily. And I think that's only going to drive the cost down as he continues to age and put more wear and tear on the body. I don't think it's going to be a huge expenditure for the Titans. And I think that probably does, while I think it's probably more prudent to let one of these guys go, I actually wouldn't be surprised if both of them end up back on this roster in 2025.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out, because I'd be in favor of giving D-Hop an extension. I don't think it's a necessity or anything. And, maybe but I don't, here's the thing. I don't want to get into the habit of trying to run it back, because that's ultimately really what hurt Mike Vrabel. There's other stuff, obviously, but one of the things that we talk about is there was that time they were chasing the ghost of, Titans past and, trying to reignite the 2019, 2020, Tennessee Titans offensively. And they kept trying to run it back in the same style and the same players, and it just never really worked. So I'm all for bringing in Higgins to a younger, not a younger Hopkins, but a guy that fills the Hopkins role that is younger. I'm okay with running it back in style of player, but maybe I'm a little hesitant to run it back with the same players. So I think I'm with you guys on the fact that I think I'm all in on I'm all in on Higgins, Ridley, and Jackson compared to anything else. So I'm just kind of, I'm with you guys. That will conclude it for the wide receiver talk. Do y'all have Stoney? What's your one more thing? You always have a one more thing. What's your one more thing?
I don't have it today. My brain is empty. It's been a busy week at Sobros HQ, so I'm empty right now.
Well, there you go. No one more thing. Mike, do you have a one more thing?
I don't. I know. Neither one of us have a one more thing today. It's
a freaking
weird
first.
day.
Well, Bluegrass Beverages is our sponsorship. We appreciate them being sponsors. 50 years in service, and they have everything you can need: alcohol, snacks, good customer service, clean bathrooms, and a massive. They have 2 beer caves, so that's pretty big. Having one beer cave is nice and all, but they have 2 beer caves that you can go shop in. They have all kinds of different beers, all kinds of unique liquor, wine, does not matter. They have it all over at Bluegrass Beverages. Mike, what do you have coming up at paulkarski.com?
I'm writing on the 2 paths for the Titans' future that will be decided this year.
Oh wow! So you've already limited the Tennessee Titans to 2 paths.
There's only 2 paths forward. I'll write
There's
about
only
both.
2 paths. There's no other paths. You're saying these paths are the highway. Like it's over for them. They just combust.
There's only 2 routes. There's a fork in the road.
Stoney, talk a little bit more. Give a little bit more preview of your Elijah Molden for stackingtheinbox.com.
Yeah, I got some good stuff coming up on Stacking the Inbox this week. I'm doing a film study on Elijah Molden. I've picked 4 games that I think are probably the best gauge between production, matchups, and timing, picking stuff later in the season to see where he trended. And I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. It's kind of made me look at the safety position for the Titans through a different lens. I'm a little more optimistic about it. And I'm eager to dig into the rest of the tape. What I've highlighted. There's going to be. I told you I usually try to pick like 10 to 11 clips for the total video from all of the games that I watch, and I've picked 11 clips from the Bucs game alone so far. So I'm stoked about that. If you're a wrestling fan, I'm writing about the 2014 ladder match for the Intercontinental title between Luke Harper and Dolph Ziggler. That's going to be out on Sobro Saturday morning. And then, Zach, we can't forget tomorrow morning on the Unofficial Titans podcast feed drops our episode, the deep dive into the history and the career of one Lindale White. It's off-season content on the Unofficial Titans podcast. The episode was awesome. You sat on a stream with me and watched me almost cry talking about Lindale White. I can't wait for the rest of the world to hear it.
Well, it got into Men's Mental Awareness Month at the end of the podcast. We're talking about June is Men's Mental Awareness Month, and we talk about that and Lindale White's struggles and how kind of underrated of a player he was in college, and how the NFL sometimes life hits you fast. It's very interesting stuff. I will be on Lamestream Media this week on 440 Sports. I finally got asked to be on Lamestream Media, being a co-host on a football show with the guy who runs the guest list for Lamestream Media. Finally on Lamestream Media on Friday, but also on Friday I will be back in the 104.5 The Zone studios with Blaine Bishop from 1 to 3. So come join us on that. The chat was absolutely unhinged, but is also electric. It was an electric factory. Blaine did not know what to do with the chat.
That's awesome
because it was just insane. But he also doesn't know what to do with John Ojukwu the hype train. So that will be. I'm going to try to put that out there a little bit more on Friday for him. Future Hall of Famer John Ojukwu coming at Blaine this Friday at 1 p.m. on 104.5 The Zone. For Mike, for Stoney, I'm Zach. This has been Football and Other F Words, and you have just been effed.